Our story began when I was 22, fresh out of college, still fumbling to figure out life. I met Emily at a friend's barbecue. She was standing by the grill, laughing at a joke I hadn't heard but wished I had made. There was something about the way she carried herself, confident, but not cocky, warm, but not overbearing. She was the kind of person who made you want to stand just a little closer, to be in her orbit. We got to talking over some charred burgers and soggy coleslaw, and before I knew it, we were deep into a conversation about her favorite books and my childhood obsession with old arcade games. It wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It just clicked. By the time the sun dipped low and the party started to wind down, I knew I wanted to see her again. Our first date was at this tiny coffee shop downtown. I'd spent way too long picking out my shirt, only to spill latte foam on it within the first 10 minutes. She laughed, reaching across the table to dab at the mess with a napkin. "Relax," she said, her smile disarming. "You don't have to impress me, I already like you." That was Emily. Honest, no games, and impossible not to fall for. The months that followed felt like the kind of montage you'd see in a rom-com. Midnight ice cream runs, lazy afternoons watching cheesy movies, and road trips where we'd get lost on purpose just to see what was out there. She wasn't just my girlfriend, she became my best friend. The one person I could tell anything to without fear of judgment. We moved in together after a year. It was a leap of faith, sure, but it felt right. Our first apartment was a glorified shoebox with paper-thin walls and a heater that only worked when it wasn't cold. But we loved it. We'd spend Sunday mornings making pancakes and dancing in the kitchen to whatever was on the radio. I couldn't picture my life without her. When I proposed, it wasn't some grand, Instagram-worthy production. I took her to the park where we had our first picnic, got down on one knee, and asked her to spend the rest of her life with me. She said yes before I could even finish my sentence. Marriage wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We navigated the usual challenges: careers, bills, and figuring out how to share a closet without losing our minds. Through it all, Emily stayed my constant. She had this way of making even the mundane feel special, like folding laundry while singing off-key to the radio or turning a rainy day into an excuse for a pillow fort in the living room. Looking back, it felt like we were building something unshakable. A partnership based on love, trust, and the kind of connection you don't find every day. I wish I could end this episode there, with that perfect picture of us. But I wouldn't be writing this if things hadn't changed. And lately it feels like the foundation we built together is starting to crack. I don't know when or why it started, but I can't ignore the feeling anymore. Something is off, and I'm terrified of what it could mean. Our first Christmas as a married couple was something I'll never forget. It had been a whirlwind of a year, adapting to married life, settling into new routines, and figuring out how to navigate all the little quirks that come with sharing your life with someone else. But by the time December rolled around, things felt like they were finally falling into place. Emily loved Christmas. I'm talking full-on decorations by Thanksgiving, playlists of old holiday classics on loop, and an embarrassing amount of Christmas cookie cutters. She transformed our little apartment into something out of a Hallmark movie, complete with a tree we picked out together at the corner lot. This year, we decided to host a Christmas party with a small group of close friends. It was freezing that night, and the snow outside gave everything a cozy glow. Our friends arrived bundled up in coats and scarves, bringing food, drinks, and an endless supply of holiday spirit. Inside, the fire crackled in the tiny electric fireplace Emily had insisted we buy, and the apartment smelled like cinnamon and mulled wine. We played games, swapped stories, and laughed until our sides hurt. It was perfect, one of those nights you wish you could bottle up and keep forever. Toward the end of the evening, after everyone had eaten far too much, Emily stood up and called for everyone's attention. "Okay, everyone, I have a little surprise," she said, her voice light but tinged with something else. Excitement, maybe? Or nerves? I couldn't quite tell. She walked over to me and handed me a small, neatly wrapped box. I looked around, confused but smiling as everyone else cheered me on. "Open it!" someone shouted, and I couldn't help but laugh at the pressure. Inside was a white stick. It took me a second to realize what I was holding. At first, my brain thought it was a thermometer or something, but then the words on the tiny screen stared back at me, pregnant. My heart stopped. I looked up at Emily, and she was beaming, her eyes brimming with tears. "We're having a baby," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room erupted in cheers, clapping, and more than a few happy tears from the group. Someone popped a bottle of champagne, and suddenly I was being hugged and congratulated from every angle. But all I could focus on was her. My wife. The love of my life. The woman who had just given me the best Christmas gift I could ever imagine. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The future seemed brighter than ever. We spent the rest of the night celebrating, toasting to new beginnings and making jokes about baby names and future Christmas mornings with the little one running around. The whole thing felt like something out of a movie. Perfect, magical, and full of promise. Looking back, I still feel the warmth of that night. But if I'm being honest, there was also a tiny pang of doubt that I pushed aside, a fleeting moment where Emily's expression shifted before she handed me the box. I didn't think much of it at the time, chalking it up to nerves or the pressure of revealing such big news in front of everyone. Now, though, I can't stop thinking about it. That brief flicker in her eyes feels heavier in my memory, like the first drop of rain before a storm. At the time, I ignored it. But maybe I shouldn't have. After the Christmas party, life seemed to pick up pace. The excitement of the pregnancy announcement lingered for weeks, casting a glow over everything. I couldn't walk past a baby store without stopping to peek at tiny onesies or imagine how our lives were going to change. Emily seemed just as thrilled, maybe even more. She threw herself into researching everything baby-related, from prenatal vitamins to nursery decor. "Do you think we should go for a jungle theme?" she asked one night as we lay in bed. Her laptop glowed with tabs full of Pinterest boards. "Or something softer, like clouds?" I laughed, tugging the laptop away. "How about we wait until we know if it's a boy or a girl first?" She grinned, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. Fair enough. We started sharing the news with family and friends, and every conversation was full of congratulations and advice. My mom cried when I told her she was going to be a grandma. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice cracking. "You're going to be an amazing dad." Hearing that made something in me shift. Suddenly, the reality of becoming a father felt more tangible. I'd always pictured myself as a dad someday, but now that it was happening, the weight of that responsibility was sinking in. It wasn't scary, exactly, it was more like this mix of awe and determination. I wanted to do everything right for this baby and for Emily. Emily's first prenatal appointment came quickly, and I cleared my schedule so I could be there. Sitting in that doctor's office, watching the ultrasound technician wave the wand across Emily's stomach, was surreal. The tiny blob on the screen didn't look like much yet, but when the technician pointed out the heartbeat, tiny, steady, and impossibly fast, I swear my own heart skipped. "That's your baby," the technician said, smiling at us. Emily squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. "Our baby," she whispered, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The next few weeks were a blur of planning and adjusting to our new reality. Emily started getting tired more often, which we chalked up to the pregnancy. She'd fall asleep on the couch mid-sentence, leaving me to laugh quietly as I draped a blanket over her. I started taking on more around the house, cooking, cleaning, anything to make things easier for her. But as much as things felt like they were moving forward, I couldn't shake this strange undercurrent of tension. It wasn't anything obvious, just little things. Emily started getting more protective of her phone for one. She'd always been the type to leave it lying around, but now, it never seemed to leave her side. I try not to think too much of it. People get weird about privacy sometimes, and with everything going on, I figured she just needed space. Still, there were moments when I caught her staring off into space, her smile faltering when she thought I wasn't looking. I'd ask if she was okay, and she'd snap back to the present, laughing it off with a pregnancy brain, I guess. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, my partner, the soon-to-be mother of our child. We'd been through so much together, and I trusted her completely. But now and then, when the house was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help but feel like there was something she wasn't telling me. Something just out of reach. Life with Emily seemed as idyllic as ever, but in the weeks following the pregnancy announcement, I began to notice small inconsistencies, things I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't dramatic, like in the movies, but there was this subtle shift in the air, like when you know a storm is brewing but can't see it yet. It started with a check. One night, while Emily was resting on the couch, I decided to tidy up the kitchen. We'd been sorting through piles of mail earlier that day, bills, coupons, holiday cards, and it had all been left in a cluttered heap on the counter. I grabbed the stack and started organizing it, tossing junk mail into the recycling and sorting the rest into neat piles. That's when I found it, a receipt from a fancy restaurant downtown. Not the kind of place we'd usually go. It was one of those upscale spots with ridiculously priced appetizers and wait lists that stretched for weeks. I flipped the receipt over, noting the date. 2 weeks ago. The total was hefty, and at the bottom, there was a handwritten note. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. J." My stomach tightened, but I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was for work. Emily sometimes had to meet with colleagues or research sponsors as part of her job. But if that were the case, why hadn't she mentioned it? She was usually so open about that sort of thing, excited to share even the mundane details of her day. I glanced over at her, curled up on the couch with a throw blanket pulled up to her chin. She was half watching a Christmas movie, her phone resting on the arm of the couch. The screen was dark, but I noticed how her hand lingered near it, as though she were waiting for a message. "Hey," I said, holding up the receipt casually. "Did you go to this place for work the other week?" Her eyes flickered to the receipt for a fraction of a second before she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, yeah? A networking thing. I guess I forgot to tell you." She waved it off, as if it were nothing. "I had to meet with a few people from the funding committee. They insisted on that place. Overrated, honestly." I nodded, letting her explanation settle in. But there was something in her tone, a little too breezy, a little too rehearsed, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I told myself I was overthinking it. Emily had never given me a reason to doubt her before. If she said it was work-related, I should believe her. But later that night, while she was asleep, I pulled out my phone and looked up the restaurant's name. There was no way a committee meeting would be held at a place like that. It was cozy and intimate, with dim lighting and a focus on romantic ambience, according to the reviews. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, my mind running in circles. There had to be an explanation. Maybe one of her coworkers had written the note as a joke. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The next few days passed uneventfully. Emily went about her routine as usual: doctor's appointments, prenatal yoga, occasional errands. If there was anything off about her behavior, it was subtle enough that I couldn't pinpoint it. But that receipt stayed in the back of my mind, like a splinter I couldn't remove. Then came the second oddity. One evening I got home from work earlier than usual. Emily wasn't there, which wasn't unusual. She'd texted earlier saying she was meeting a friend for coffee. But as I tossed my keys onto the counter, I noticed her coat wasn't hanging on the rack. Instead, her heavier winter coat, the one she hardly wore, was draped across the back of a chair in the kitchen. It was strange because the weather hadn't been cold enough to need it. Curious, I checked the coat pockets, thinking she might have left something behind. My fingers brushed against something crinkly. I pulled out a folded piece of paper, a business card. It was from a hotel. My chest tightened as I turned the card over. It was from a boutique place across town, one of those stylish, boutique hotels that people went to for special occasions. There was a handwritten room number scrawled on the back, room 405. My first thought was that this had to be a mistake. Maybe she'd found the card somewhere or borrowed the coat from a friend. But a small voice inside me whispered something darker, something I didn't want to hear. That night, I asked her how coffee with her friend went. She smiled easily, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, it was nice," she said. "We just caught up on life, baby stuff. Nothing too exciting." I nodded, but my mind was already racing. She didn't mention the hotel or the receipt, and I didn't ask. Not yet. If something was going on, I needed more than scraps of circumstantial evidence. I needed the truth. And I had no idea how I was going to find it. Despite the strange little things I couldn't shake from my mind, like the receipt and the business card, life with Emily marched forward, full of baby preparations and milestones. Her pregnancy brought out a side of her I'd never seen before, deeply nurturing, endlessly excited, and utterly obsessed with making our home baby ready. One chilly Saturday morning, Emily woke me up before sunrise with an idea. "We need a nursery," she said, her voice light and filled with energy despite the early hour. "A proper one. The baby's going to be here before we know it." Still groggy, I sat up in bed. "We have months to figure it out," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. "But okay, what do you have in mind?" That was the start of our big nursery project. Emily wanted everything to be perfect. She'd gone down a rabbit hole of Pinterest boards and baby blogs, pulling up countless ideas for themes, layouts, and color palettes. I played along, happy to see her so excited about the future. We spent the next week visiting baby stores, leafing through catalogs, and debating over everything from cribs to curtains. "I like this one," I said, pointing at a simple wooden crib in the store. It wasn't flashy, but it was sturdy, and I liked the craftsmanship. Emily wrinkled her nose. "Too plain," she said. "What about this one?" She gestured toward a sleek, modern crib with curved edges and a price tag that made my wallet wince. "Are we buying furniture or commissioning art?" I joked, but she didn't laugh. She just sighed, her hand resting on her belly. "I just want it to be nice," she said softly. "You know, for the baby." Her words tugged at me, and I let the argument go. She had a vision, and it was clear this nursery meant a lot to her. Maybe it was her way of nesting, of trying to create a space where she felt safe and prepared for the monumental change ahead. We ended up leaving the store with a list of potential purchases but no final decisions. "Let's sleep on it," I suggested, hoping to find a middle ground between her high-end tastes and my budget-conscious instincts. Emily agreed, though I caught her scrolling through her phone later that evening, likely looking for more options. The next weekend, she suggested we look at furniture for the rest of the house. "If we're going to do the nursery," she reasoned, "we might as well freshen up everything else too. You know, make it feel more like a home for a family." It was hard to argue with her logic. I wanted the house to feel like a home too, so we spent another Saturday bouncing between furniture stores and home improvement outlets. Emily was in her element, debating over fabric swatches and testing out every sofa she could find. I followed along, trying to stay engaged, but my mind kept drifting. It wasn't that I didn't care about the baby or our home. I did. But there was something about Emily's enthusiasm that felt almost desperate. Like she was rushing to build something perfect, something untouchable. And in quieter moments, I wondered if it was because she felt guilty. As we wandered through a showroom, Emily paused in front of a large dining table. "What do you think of this?" she asked, running her fingers along the smooth wooden surface. "It's nice," I replied, though my attention was elsewhere. I couldn't stop replaying the little oddities in my mind, the fancy receipt, the business card, the times she'd been vague about where she'd been. None of it added up, and it was starting to eat at me. "You seem distracted," she said, tilting her head to look at me. I forced a smile. "Just thinking about how we're going to afford all this," I joked, deflecting her concern. She laughed, brushing it off. "One thing at a time. We'll figure it out." That night, as we settled into bed, Emily was unusually affectionate. She curled up beside me, her hand resting on my chest. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice drowsy but sincere. "For what?" I asked, brushing her hair away from her face. For going along with all my crazy ideas. For being you? Her words should have reassured me, but instead, they made my chest tighten. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that everything was fine. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't saying. Something she was keeping from me. The little oddities in Emily's behavior continued to gnaw at me. No matter how hard I tried to push them aside, they always crept back when things got quiet. I wanted to believe everything was fine, that we were just navigating the stress and excitement of pregnancy like any other couple. But deep down, a seed of doubt had taken root, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. It started innocently enough. I was doing some reading late one night, Googling articles about pregnancy and fatherhood, trying to prepare myself for the whirlwind ahead. Somewhere along the way, I stumbled on an article about prenatal paternity tests. I hadn't even known such a thing was possible. The test was non-invasive. It didn't require anything more than a blood sample from the mother and a DNA sample from the potential father. The process seemed straightforward, clinical even. But the implications? They were anything but simple. I couldn't shake the memory of that receipt from the fancy restaurant, the hotel business card, and the way Emily's stories sometimes didn't quite add up. My mind was spinning. What if I wasn't overthinking this? What if there was something real behind my suspicions? For days I wrestled with the idea. A part of me felt guilty for even considering it. Emily was my wife, the woman I'd built my life with. How could I doubt her like this? But another part of me, the part that woke up at 3 a.m. replaying every odd moment in my mind, kept whispering that I needed to know the truth. So, I made a decision. One evening, when Emily went to her prenatal yoga class, I found myself standing in our bathroom, staring at her hairbrush. It was a simple wooden brush, the kind she'd used for years, and it still had a few strands of her hair tangled in the bristles. My hand hovered over it, trembling slightly. This is crazy, I muttered to myself. But the need for answers outweighed the guilt. I grabbed a small plastic bag from the kitchen and carefully placed the hairbrush inside. The next day, I made an appointment with a clinic that specialized in prenatal paternity tests. I told them I had a hair sample and that I wanted everything handled discreetly. They assured me it was a common request, that confidentiality was their priority. Still, walking into that sterile office felt surreal, like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. The technician was professional, not prying or judgmental. They explained the process. They'd extract Emily's DNA from the hair sample, compare it to mine, and analyze it alongside the baby's genetic markers from her latest blood draw. Results would take about a week. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady as I handed over the plastic bag. How accurate is this? I asked, my throat dry. Over 99%, the technician replied. It's as definitive as it gets. As I left the clinic, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that the wheels were finally in motion, but also an overwhelming sense of dread. What if the results shattered everything? What if they confirmed the doubts I'd been trying so hard to suppress? When I got home that evening, Emily was sitting on the couch, flipping through a baby name book. She looked up and smiled as I walked in, her face glowing with happiness. Hey you, she said. Come help me pick names. I forced a smile, dropping my bag by the door. Sure, I said, sitting beside her. But my mind was far away, tangled in what-ifs and unanswered questions. For the next few days, I kept up the facade. I went to work, helped with the nursery plans, and tried to act like everything was normal. Emily didn't seem to notice anything was off, which made the guilt even harder to bear. But every night, as I lay in bed beside her, I couldn't stop counting down the days until the results came in. Answers were coming, and once I had them, there would be no turning back. The week waiting for the test results felt like an eternity. Every small interaction with Emily seemed charged with tension, though she didn't seem to notice anything was different. I told myself I was just overanalyzing everything. But then, she slipped up, big time. It happened one Saturday afternoon. We'd spent the morning clearing out the spare room to make space for the nursery. Emily had been her usual self, decisive and enthusiastic as she directed me on what to move where. By the time we finished, we were both exhausted, collapsing onto the couch with mugs of tea. "I'm going to take a quick shower," she said, standing and stretching. "You should relax. You've been lifting half the house today." I smiled as she left the room, grateful for the break. But as I sat there, my eyes wandered to her phone on the coffee table. Normally, Emily was glued to it, always checking baby apps or chatting in some pregnancy forum. The fact that she'd left it behind struck me as odd. At first, I told myself not to look. Snooping wasn't my style, and besides, I'd already gone far enough with the paternity test. But as I stared at the screen, my gut told me this might be the moment to finally confirm, or disprove, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Before I could second-guess myself, I grabbed the phone. The screen lit up, revealing a series of notifications. Most were harmless, emails, reminders, but one caught my eye immediately. "Can't wait to see you again," from someone saved as AL. I froze. My heart pounded as I stared at the message, every fiber of my being screaming that this was the proof I didn't want to find. My thumb hovered over the notification, but before I could open it, the sound of the shower shutting off jolted me. I quickly set the phone back down and moved to the kitchen, pretending to be busy. When Emily came out a few minutes later, her hair damp and wrapped in a towel, she barely glanced at me before grabbing her phone. I watched as she unlocked it, her expression changing subtly as she saw the message. She quickly swiped it away, her movements too quick, too deliberate. "Everything okay?" I asked casually, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "Yeah," she said, a little too brightly. "Just checking my reminders. I need to pick up a few things from the store later." She avoided eye contact, busying herself with folding the towel and moving to the bedroom. It wasn't like her to be this flustered. And that was when it hit me, she wasn't just distracted, she was hiding something. That night, I couldn't let it go. Who was AL? A coworker? A friend? Someone she was leaning on during the pregnancy? Or was it something worse? My mind went in circles, replaying every little odd moment I'd ignored over the past few months. The late-night texts she'd shielded from me, the times she claimed to be meeting friends but returned home with vague stories and no real details, the business card, the receipt. It all started to feel like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet put together. I decided to test the waters. "Hey," I said as we were getting into bed, trying to keep my tone casual. "I noticed you've been pretty busy on your phone lately. Anything interesting going on?" Emily hesitated for the briefest second before smiling. "Oh, just baby stuff," she said, pulling the covers up around her. "Forums, articles, you know, the usual." I nodded, pretending to believe her. But the knot in my stomach told me I couldn't take her words at face value anymore. As Emily drifted off to sleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. The message from AL had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't ignore. Whatever was going on, I needed to figure it out before the test results arrived. Something told me that those two threads, her behavior and the results, were connected in a way I wasn't ready to face yet. But I would face it. I had to. The email from the clinic arrived first thing in the morning. I'd been obsessively checking my inbox every day, but when I finally saw it, my stomach dropped. My hand hovered over the notification, my chest tightening as I clicked to open it. Subject: Prenatal paternity test results. Dear Mr. Carter, we regret to inform you that we were unable to complete the analysis due to insufficient genetic material from the mother's sample. I reread the words, my pulse pounding in my ears. The email went on to explain that while the hair from Emily's brush had been a usable sample, it didn't provide enough intact DNA for the test. To complete the process, they need another source, something more reliable, like a toothbrush or a used tissue. Great, I muttered under my breath, frustration bubbling up. I had built myself up for this moment, ready to finally confront the truth, and now I was back to waiting. Still, there was no backing out now. I couldn't let this drop, not with everything I'd seen and felt. If the clinic needed more, then I'd find a way to get it. I glanced toward the bedroom, where Emily was still asleep, curled under the blankets. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, her slippers neatly tucked by the side of the bed. She looked peaceful, like she didn't have a care in the world. The sight made my chest tighten. Was I the one ruining this, spiraling because of a string of coincidences? Or was I just finally waking up to a truth I didn't want to see? By the time Emily woke up, I had already made a mental plan. I'd look for another sample, something she wouldn't notice missing. A toothbrush would be easy enough. She kept extras in the bathroom drawer for when guests stayed over. I could swap hers out without her suspecting a thing. "Morning," she said groggily, shuffling into the kitchen and reaching for the coffee pot. Her hair was a messy halo around her face, and she gave me a sleepy smile. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my voice light. "Work stuff on my mind." It wasn't entirely a lie. My job had been demanding lately, but the real weight on my mind was standing right in front of me. She yawned and leaned against the counter, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. "We've got that store appointment today, remember? For the crib?" I nodded, though the thought of shopping for baby furniture felt almost surreal in light of everything else. "Yeah, I'm ready whenever you are." Emily smiled, looking genuinely excited, and for a moment, I felt like the worst person in the world for doubting her. She was glowing, happy even. But that nagging voice in the back of my head wouldn't let me forget the unanswered questions. Later that afternoon, while she was out running errands, I seized my opportunity. I went to the bathroom and carefully retrieved her toothbrush, slipping it into a plastic baggie and replacing it with one of the spares. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding as though I were committing some kind of crime. When Emily got home, she didn't seem to notice anything different. She kissed me on the cheek, chatting about the boutique she'd visited and some baby clothes she'd seen. I nodded along, trying to act normal, but the weight of what I'd done was impossible to ignore. That night, after Emily fell asleep, I drove back to the clinic and dropped off the new sample. The receptionist assured me they'd expedite the results, but it would still take a few days. I thanked her and left, my mind racing. This time, there would be no ambiguity. Soon I'd know the truth. I just wasn't sure if I was ready for it. The clinic called the next morning while I was at work. I ducked into an empty conference room to take the call, my heart racing as I answered. "Mr. Carter?" The receptionist's voice was polite, calm. "This is Lynn from Genesis Labs. We've received the additional sample you dropped off. Unfortunately, due to high demand for prenatal tests, processing will take longer than anticipated unless you'd like to expedite the analysis for an additional fee." "How much?" I asked immediately, pacing the small room. "It would be $500 for priority processing," she said. "That would ensure your results are ready within 48 hours. I leaned against the wall, pinching the bridge of my nose. $500 wasn't a small amount to throw around, but the thought of waiting even longer was unbearable. I couldn't stand another sleepless night, lying next to Emily while the questions ate me alive. "I'll pay," I said without hesitation. "How do we set that up?" Lynn walked me through the payment process over the phone. I confirmed everything and hung up, my hands trembling as I slid my phone back into my pocket. 2 days. In 2 days I'd have my answer. I returned to my desk, trying to focus on work, but my mind was elsewhere. Time seemed to crawl as the hours dragged on, every tick of the clock feeling heavier than the last. Emily texted me that afternoon, her messages cheerful and full of updates about the nursery plans. Emily found the cutest set of baby blankets at Target. "The theme is coming together." Smiling face with heart eyes. "Me, sounds great. Can't wait to see it tonight." I stared at my response, the blandness of it a stark contrast to the storm inside me. Emily's enthusiasm felt genuine, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if I was wrong. If all the little oddities, the receipt, the business card, the texts, were just harmless coincidences. But then I thought about AL, and the way she had brushed off my questions about her phone. The pieces didn't fit. That night, We went through the nursery plans again. Emily was radiant, flipping through catalog pages and showing me her latest ideas. She wanted to order a rocking chair, some shelves, and a mural kit for one of the walls. "What do you think?" she asked, tilting her head as she held up a swatch of soft pastel colors. "Looks perfect," I said, forcing a smile. She grinned, satisfied, and went back to her planning. As I watched her, I felt a pang of guilt. She was so invested in this, in building our future together. But if the results came back confirming my worst fears, would any of this matter? Would it all just unravel? The next 2 days felt like a lifetime. I went through the motions at work and home, trying to act normal while my mind spiraled. Emily didn't seem to notice, caught up in her nesting and baby preparations. But inside, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way. Finally, the clinic emailed me late one evening. I saw the notification on my phone, my breath catching as I stared at the screen. Subject: Prenatal paternity test results expedite complete. I sat there for a moment, my thumb hovering over the notification. The truth was waiting for me in that email. But for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to open it, not yet. I needed one more moment to prepare myself for whatever came next. I had spent 2 sleepless nights staring at that email. The words, "Prenatal paternity test results," had burned into my brain, daring me to click. But every time I tried, my hand froze. What if the results were exactly what I feared? What would I do then? The idea for the party came to me in the dead of night, somewhere between panic and clarity. Emily had been talking about hosting a gender reveal party, inviting our close circle of friends to celebrate the baby. It was perfect, not because I wanted to reveal the baby's gender, but because I wanted to reveal the truth. The setting would be intimate, everyone we trusted would be there, and most importantly, I'd finally confront Emily with the answers I'd been too afraid to face alone. I sent out the invites the next morning, keeping it casual. "We're doing a little reveal party," I texted. "Close friends only. Snacks, drinks, and maybe a surprise or two." Everyone RSVP'd quickly, excited to join in. Emily was thrilled by the idea, throwing herself into planning. She went full Pinterest mode, organizing decorations, a cake, and even little party favors for the guests. Watching her, I almost felt sick. She was so good at playing the part of the loving wife, the expectant mother. But I knew better now. I'd finally opened the email the night before, and the truth inside it had rocked me to my core. The test results were definitive. I was not the father. And the man who was? His name wasn't in the results, of course, but I didn't need it. The clues had all been there, scattered across the past few months like breadcrumbs. The fancy restaurant receipt, the hotel card, the text from AL. It all pointed to one person. Adam. Adam was the boyfriend of Emily's best friend, Chloe. He was charming, good-looking, and always seemed to be around whenever Chloe and Emily had plans. I'd never thought much of it before, but now it was glaringly obvious. The subtle glances, the inside jokes, the way his name always seemed to pop up in Emily's stories, it all added up. The night of the party, the house was buzzing with excitement. Emily had outdone herself, setting up balloons and streamers in soft pastel colors. The cake sat on the dining table, a knife ready to cut into it. Emily looked radiant, mingling with our friends and laughing as she recounted funny moments from the pregnancy so far. I stood by, smiling when I needed to, but my mind was elsewhere. Then Adam walked in with Chloe. "Hey guys!" he said, flashing his usual dazzling smile. He handed Emily a small gift bag, leaning in for a quick hug. I watched his hand linger just a fraction too long on her back, my blood boiling beneath the surface. The party went on for about an hour before Emily clapped her hands together. "All right, everyone. It's time for the big reveal," she announced, her face glowing with excitement. Everyone gathered around the dining table, their phones out to capture the moment. Emily picked up the knife, ready to cut into the cake. But before she could, I cleared my throat, my voice cutting through the cheerful chatter. "Actually, I have a different reveal in mind," I said, stepping forward. Emily froze, the knife poised above the cake. What do you mean? She asked, her smile faltering. I pulled out the printed results from the clinic, holding them up for everyone to see. This isn't just a gender reveal party, I said, my voice steady but cold. It's also a paternity reveal. The room went dead silent. Emily's face drained of color, her hand dropping to her side. What are you talking about? She stammered, her eyes darting toward the paper in my hand. I didn't let her off the hook. I did a prenatal paternity test, I said, my words sharp as knives. And guess what? I'm not the father. Gasps rippled through the room. Chloe put a hand to her mouth, looking horrified. Adam shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Emily, who looked like she was about to collapse. Care to explain, Emily? I asked, stepping closer. Or should we let Adam do the honors? At the mention of his name, all eyes turned to Adam. He looked like a deer in headlights, his face pale as he tried to stammer out a response. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice trembling. Don't lie to me, I snapped, the anger I'd been holding in finally breaking free. The fancy dinners, the hotel card, the late-night messages from AL, it all makes sense now. You've been sleeping with my wife, and now she's pregnant with your child. Emily burst into tears, her hands covering her face. I'm sorry, she sobbed. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Chloe looked at Adam, betrayal etched across her face. Is this true? She demanded, her voice shaking. Adam didn't answer. He just stood there, his silence speaking louder than words. The room erupted into chaos, accusations, shouting, tears. I stood there, watching as the carefully constructed facade of my life crumbled before my eyes. The truth was out, and there was no going back. I sat in the empty kitchen the morning after the party, staring at the remnants of the decorations Emily had so lovingly put together. The pastel balloons were still taped to the walls, and the half-untouched cake sat on the counter like a monument to the chaos of the night before. All the baby things we'd been shopping for, the furniture, the nursery plans, they weren't just for me and Emily. They were for her new life with Adam. The truth hit me like a freight train as I replayed her tearful confession after the results came out. You don't understand, Emily had cried, her face streaked with mascara. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Adam and we were just talking at first, but then it got serious. He loves me. He wants to take care of me and the baby. Take care of you? I had shouted, my voice trembling with rage. On my dime? All those things we picked out, all the shopping trips, they weren't for us. They were for you and him. You were going to use my money to set up your perfect little life together. Emily had sobbed harder, her hands clutching at her hair. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought maybe we could keep it quiet, but I couldn't stop. Adam said we could make it work, that we could have a fresh start. And what was I supposed to be in all this, Emily? I demanded. The sucker footing the bill while you two played house? Her silence had been answer enough. Now, sitting in that quiet kitchen, I could still hear the echoes of our argument. The fury bubbling inside me hadn't subsided. If anything, it had grown sharper with every passing minute. Emily emerged from the bedroom, her face puffy and tired. She hesitated in the doorway, clutching the edge of the frame. Can we talk? She asked softly, her voice raw. Talk? I repeated bitterly. You mean now that your little secret's out? Sure, let's talk. She winced at the venom in my tone but stepped into the kitchen anyway, pulling out a chair across from me. I know what I did was wrong, she began, her voice trembling. I lied to you, and I betrayed you. But I need you to understand. Understand what, Emily? I snapped, cutting her off. That you fell in love with someone else? That you planned to leave me while pretending everything was fine? Or that you thought you could milk me for every penny before walking out the door? Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I didn't care. My sympathy had run dry. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed bitterly. Well, congratulations. You failed spectacularly. She flinched but pressed on. Adam, he made me feel like I wasn't invisible anymore. Like I mattered. And when I found out I was pregnant, he said he'd be there for me no matter what. And what about me? I demanded, slamming my hand on the table. What about the man who's been here for years? The one who's worked to give you everything you've ever wanted? Was I just convenient until something better came along? Emily shook her head, her tears flowing freely now. It wasn't like that. I loved you. I still do. But things changed, and I didn't know how to fix it. You didn't even try. I roared. Instead of coming to me, you ran to him. You made plans with him. You built a whole new life in your head and left me in the dark. Her sobs turned into quiet sniffles, and for a moment either of us spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with everything we couldn't say. Finally, I broke it. I want you out, I said coldly. Today. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? You heard me. Pack your things and go. Go to Adam. Go build that fresh start you were so excited about. But don't you dare think you're taking another dime from me. Emily opened her mouth to protest but closed it again, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She nodded, standing up slowly. I'll pack my things, she said quietly. But please don't shut me out of the baby's life. Her words were like a dagger to my chest. I wanted to scream that it wasn't my baby, that she and Adam had forfeited any claim to my kindness. But instead I stayed silent, watching as she disappeared into the bedroom to start packing. I stared out the window, my hands clenched into fists. Emily was leaving, just like she'd planned. But this time, it wouldn't be on her terms. The house was eerily quiet as I sat in the living room, waiting for Emily to finish packing. The weight of everything, her betrayal, Adam's involvement, the sheer audacity of their plans, pressed down on me like a crushing tide. I'd made up my mind, there was no coming back from this. I heard her suitcase wheels squeak against the hardwood floor as she emerged from the bedroom. She'd packed light, just one suitcase and a few things stuffed into a tote bag. I didn't offer to help. Emily stopped in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said sharply. Whatever excuse or apology you're about to offer, don't waste your breath. It's over, Emily. You made your choices. Her lip quivered, but she nodded. I know I hurt you, she said softly, her voice cracking. And I'll live with that for the rest of my life. But I do care about you, even if it doesn't mean anything now. I stood, my anger bubbling just below the surface. Caring about someone isn't lying to them. It isn't scheming with another man while pretending everything's fine. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed every ounce of trust one had in you. And for what? Him? She flinched at the venom in my voice but didn't deny it. I'm leaving, she said finally. But please, can we stay in contact? For the baby? I don't want to keep you away if... Stop, I interrupted, my tone ice cold. That's not my child, Emily. It's Adam's. You and I both know it. I'm done pretending to play house while you live some twisted double life. You're leaving this house, and you're leaving my life. For good. Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but I didn't waver. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but then thought better of it. Goodbye, she whispered, her voice barely audible, before turning and walking out the door. I followed her to make sure she left, standing on the porch as she rolled her suitcase down the driveway. The winter bit at my skin, but I didn't move until I saw her car pull away. As the taillights disappeared down the street, I went back inside and slammed the door shut behind me. The sound echoed through the empty house, as if marking the finality of it all. I spent the next hour methodically removing every trace of her. The baby catalogs, the swatches, the photo albums on the shelves, all of it went into boxes. I'd decide later whether to toss them or donate them. For now, I just wanted them gone. When I finished, I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch, staring at the blank wall where our wedding photo used to hang. Emily was gone. Adam could have her now, and they could deal with the fallout of their decisions. As for me, I was done. No more contact. No more lies. No more pretending. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again.